She was screaming and thrashing in pain like a mad woman against two blue uniformed paramedics and a nurse in white who was desperately trying to press a wad of white gauze to her face in an attempt to stem the flow of blood still pouring from the numerous lacerations on her face. "Oh, Anya." Nichols dragged himself to his feet just as two more nurses came hurtling through the automatic doors wheeling a hospital gurney between them. "Help her," Nichols said breathlessly, "please." Fighting growing nausea and a creeping unconsciousness that was gnawing at the back of his aching head, Nichols got 2 unsteady paces closer when his eye caught a body to the left of the doors. Half covered by a pink hospital blanket, just laid there. "Lewis," Nichols clasped his hand over his mouth in horror, barely managing to suppress a howl of despair. Then, no. He wasn't thinking straight. Whilst he was flailing through the darkness, he had distinctly heard someone say Lewis was already inside, taken straight into surgery. Although the woman had added, "Think he's DOA anyway." Despair fought with hope for control of Nichols' heart. "No," he told himself again, "get a grip. Don't give up on Lewis just yet. He was strong, badly hurt but oh so strong." That wasn't Lewis under the blanket. That was. Nichols suddenly stopped like he'd just hit a glass wall. "Jeff." The blanket barely reached to the young man's knees so that his lower legs and feet were sticking pathetically out of the bottom. Somewhere in his final moments Jeff had lost his left shoe, which revealed a hole in the sole of his exposed sock. One final indignity in his all too short a life. Nichols cried out in anguish and turned away, before he broke down altogether. He staggered over to the entrance where the nurses had just lifted Anya onto the gurney. "Anya," he shouted. "Father?" She sobbed blindly, and tried to sit up before being pushed back down again by one of the nurses. Hey, lay still," the nurse said. "Father? Is that you, please?" "Oh, Anya." Nichols bumped into the gurney and took her hand, which was slippery with blood. He winced. Her face was a mess of torn flesh, blood and bits of white gauze stuck to her wounds. There were so many he stopped counting them at double figures, which was about the time his heart broke. "Oh, Father. Is that really you?" "Yes, I'm here, Anya, I'm safe. It's a miracle," she sobbed. And squeezed his hand with remarkable strength. "Please, we have to get her inside," the calm female nurse insisted. Of course," Nichols said. "Father. Please don't leave me." Peroni pleaded. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. They moved as a group into the A&E reception where they were met by a young pale-faced looking doctor. "Straight into room 2 please." He pushed in past one of the nurses and gave Peroni's face a quick once-over. Nichols was surprised and heartened to see the young man didn't even flinch. He nodded, then collared the calm nurse. "Sadie, put a call out for Dr. Parsons. The other guy has gone straight into surgery." "Yes, doctor," and with that she was off into action. "He's alive?" Nichols asked the doctor in astonishment. "So far," the doctor replied, bringing his attention back to Peroni. Then, as if he'd just seen him, he looked up at Nichols. "Who are you?" He was about to answer, when one of the nurses said, "Her father." Of course, his dog collar was gone. Nichols felt a lump in his throat. He would have been proud to be. Someone behind Nichols shouted, "And will someone get that body outside onto a gurney and out of sight, please? What is this, a fucking war zone?" Not far off, Nichols thought. "Okay, move." The young doctor ordered, and Peroni's hand was suddenly wrenched from Nichols as she was pushed away. "Father!" She screamed, flailing her arms around, blindly trying to find him. "I'm here." Nichols made to follow, but a large paramedic appeared out of nowhere and stood in his path. Peroni was gone through a doorway and out of sight before he could protest. "Sorry, sir, you can't go any further, not just yet. Let them see to your daughter, someone will be out very soon to give you an update." Nichols looked up at the man dumbly. "Please, she's in good hands." The paramedic indicated to a shocked-looking security guard who was watching Jeff's body being wheeled in and off down another corridor. "Hey, Trent." He waved him over to them. "Everything okay?" the security guard asked. "Yeah, this is that woman's father. Keep an eye on him, until I can send someone over. And don't let him back there whatever you do." He hooked his thumb over his shoulder to the treatment area. "Okay," he nodded and took Nichols gently but firmly by the arm. "Sir." "I'm not going anywhere." Nichols tried to pull away, his eyes fixed on the door. Peroni had disappeared though. A nurse in blood-splattered scrubs exited and rushed off, giving him a fleeting glimpse of the flurry of activity going on inside. Then the door snapped shut again. Then it hit him, the shock of it all. He began to shake and the tears came again. The shock just snuck up from behind him and overwhelmed him in a heartbeat. His legs gave way, But, thankfully, the security guard caught a hold of him and half carried, half ushered him over to a nearby seat. "It's okay, I've got you." He gently sat Nichols down and pulled over a seat for himself and sat down next to him. Nichols stared down at his trembling, blood-soaked hands, then around to take in the reality of his surroundings. He was out, alive as were Peroni and Lewis, for now at least. Then the second wave of shock slapped him hard in the face. Thank you," he sobbed and wrapped his arms around himself. "Oh, thank you." The security guard put a hand on his shaking shoulder, but it wasn't the security guard he was thanking, not even the medical staff. It was his sworn enemy. Randall. What a paradox the collector was. He had kept his part of their secret bargain, more so in fact. He had promised to get them all out of there, which he had done. Nichols had written the text but not sent it before Larry had pulled his lunatic stunt with the gun. It was written more in catharsis than anything, at their desperate situation, a guilty little pleasure but one he had never intended to action and actually send. Until of course McCulloch had showed his true selfish colors. In truth he had never tried to hide what he was or what he would do given half the chance, so it came as no surprise when he turned the gun on them all. So Nichols had sent it without really contemplating how the words could be interpreted, especially by an agent of the devil. He had no way of knowing how Randall would choose to interpret the text. He would have been well within the spirit of the deal if he had just dumped them all in the middle of the street outside the house, or miles from anywhere, where Anya and Lewis would have surely bled to death. Or Randall could have simply gone back on his word altogether once he had Larry in the box, but he hadn't. This soldier of darkness, Nichols' sworn enemy, had effectively saved Anya's, and God willing, Lewis' lives, and spared Nichols. Wasn't he supposed to be the bad man? Tears came again, this time in floods, and Nichols didn't even try to repress the sobs that followed. The security guard next to him tried his best to comport what he thought was the grieving father, but Nichols was barely aware he or anything around him was even there. The world around him had turned to mush as the tears drowned out his vision. Tears of relief, for sure, tears no one would begrudge him after so many days on the edge of life and death. But equally these were tears of shame. He had betrayed McCulloch, and worse still, in the end he was happy to do so. The guilt would pass in time. Larry was an easy man to betray with a clean conscience. But wasn't Nichols the good guy in all this? The one on the side of righteousness? Yet it had been Randall, the demon, who had delivered on his oath to Nichols, above and beyond what had been expected of him. And Nichols? He was the cheat, for the right reasons perhaps, but he was the cheat in all this nevertheless. The one-time priest, the righteous man. It's empty. Israel shrieked as he stared down into the open box with his mouth gaping open in shock. He mouthed something Randall didn't catch through the mask and shook his head. He put his hands on his hips, an action that nearly made Randall laugh out loud. What with the mask and the tutu, he looked just so damn camp. Like a reptilian ballet dancer who had just discovered there were no more cookies left in the jar. Still, he was right, no getting away from the fact. The box was empty. That priest, the fucker, Israel shouted to the ceiling, then began pacing. He lied to us. That cocksucker lied to us. It's getting so you can't trust anyone these days. Randall picked his way through the bloody remains of Larry McCulloch that were strewn all over the room. The soul extraction had been a particularly messy and painful affair, as requested by his bosses. That, and perhaps due to the fact the man's soul was probably so shriveled and black that the demons who had torn him apart with such glee had trouble locating it. He peered into the offending empty box again. Damn clever trick, he had to admit. The priest had pulled off a masterful burn with this one. He would make a good collector. But, Israel stammered with such frustration that Randall considered making steam come out of his pointy ears. But decided not to add insult to injury. He didn't take it with him, Israel said, his tiny brain working overtime. We would have sensed it. This would have been true, if there had been a poem in this room to start with. Don't you get it? He said. It was all a bluff. Christ, that priest must have balls the size of a bull's. He nudged the box, but had to pull his hand away. It was empty but still emitting a nauseating amount of power despite its lack of contents. But he spoke some of the words. Israel's voice trailed off. Didn't he? I seem to remember you were just a blur heading for the door when he opened it. But no, now he thought back, the priest hadn't uttered so much as a word from the text. Randall shuddered. This box is real enough, must have held a poem for hundreds of years to absorb that amount of power from it. I dread to think what it would have felt like if there had been a poem in there, Israel said. Exactly, Randall agreed and wrapped the box in the same towel Nichols had used. This was a watershed moment and Randall knew it. He could only imagine what power the poem possessed, just a few faded lines on an ordinary piece of paper, so legend had it. Simple ancient words written in Miner's own blood. Left dormant for 2 centuries, locked away in some Vatican archive. Its power seeping through to the very wood of the box until his kind couldn't even tell an empty one from the real thing. That was real power right there. If the Vatican ever realized the potential of the weapon they had right under their noses, that would be a day of reckoning, all right. But if they had, they would have surely allowed the priest to bring the real thing, even if only to test its power in the field. The fact that they hadn't gave Randall hope, he doubted they believed in any of this. All the same, it would be prudent for Randall and his kind to continue to conduct their war in secret. The priest for one couldn't have known what would happen when he opened the box while Randall was in the room. That the box had so much residue power Nichols himself was oblivious to. So it was nothing more than a sleight of hand trick he had up his sleeve if Randall got to them before they escaped with Larry to the Vatican. One last throw of the dice when all else was lost. No wonder the priest had looked so scared. Randall had assumed he was fearful of what effect the poem's power once unleashed would have on mere mortals within its range, let alone the bricks and mortar around them. But in truth Nichols couldn't have known if Randall would feel anything at all, that is was just, as in fact it was, an empty box. It was a master bluff, and one Randall himself would have been proud of. The priest had pulled it off beautifully despite that fear. Randall was impressed and hoped they would indeed meet again as the priest had prophesied. Randall was impressed with the priest. Israel was not. "I told you we should have slaughtered them all," the demon spat. "I demand you get him back here, now. For a right royal fucking. He's long gone. Besides, a little cheating aside, a deal's a deal. Don't be such a sore loser." "Faye," came the reply. The truth was they had what they came for. Larry McCulloch had pulled his last double cross and had paid dearly for it. It was mission accomplished as far as Randall was concerned. He and the priest, he noticed the broken dog collar on the floor, or whatever he was now, would meet again, and when they did he would gladly shake the man's hand before ripping his cheating heart out. The collector took in the room and nodded at a job well done. Then they were away from here. The full extent of the damage caused to the house, not to mention its contents, would be revealed, so he decided a good old-fashioned gas explosion would cover that up nicely. It would appear to a forensic team like a deliberate act to cover up the remains of McCulloch they would also find here, but that was fine. No doubt the old crook's death would be put down to one of his numerous enemies. One thing was for sure though, no one would mourn Larry McCulloch. He turned to the table and the box. The thing was useless now, and being in its proximity was making his skin crawl. He tipped the table so the box slid from under the towel and onto the floor. It was priceless, sure, but Randall had no need for money, so took great pleasure in kicking the box hard against the wall where it splintered in a dozen pieces. "That's all she wrote," he said, and was about to head for the door and a well-earned rest when he caught sight of Israel. The demon's crooked back straightened and he turned his face up as if sniffing the air. Wait, Israel said, concentrating. Randall let out a sigh. This could only mean one thing. Israel was getting a message through the ether. Israel. Shh. Israel held up a hand to silence him as he listened. He said, nodding. "Another assignment, collector." "So soon?" "Yes, and a big one by the sounds of it." "Oh, well," Randall said with resignation. "No rest for the wicked." Then he got the joke. "Ha! Get it?" Israel hung his head and gave a sigh of disgust. "Get it? That's us, no rest for the wicked."